I'd like to start by saying that I hope you had a great weekend, but let's be honest. I know a lot of you probably didn't. You're most likely aware by now that on Saturday, every major network and cable news channel called the presidential race for former Vice President Joe Biden. You probably saw even the street celebrations in liberal strongholds like Washington and New York City. The smell of weed was pungent. I practically got a contact high in my own apartment. Lots of noise, lots of car horns and people shouting and dancing in the street. Oh, whatever happened to social distancing, I might want to ask. They were reacting to the news as if some third world dictator had finally been overthrown. A man so tyrannical that when the single greatest opportunity in a generation presented itself to consolidate power in the hands of the federal government, and I'm talking about COVID-19, he chose to just defer to the states and try to get us back to our normal lives and maximum freedom as soon as possible, just like Stalin would have. Yeah. So what now? Well, here's what CNN host and Democratic mouthpiece Fake Tapper is telling us to do.
As we say in Philadelphia, trust the process. Under slightly different circumstances, of course, but trust the process.
Trust the process, huh? Interesting demand considering that casting doubt on the process is exactly what Democrats have been doing for the past 4 years. Those efforts started during the 2016 election with claims of Russian meddling in the election, really Russians determining the outcome, if you recall. Journalists breathlessly reported that Vladimir Putin and Russian intelligence services, quote, hacked our democracy. Of course, that turned out to be little more than a handful of Russian troll farmers and a pittance spent on Facebook ads. When all was said and done, the case against the companies financing these troll farms was so weak, the DOJ was forced to drop the charges in their entirety when it came time to prosecute them in 2018. Oh, gosh. But it was Russian collusion. The idea the Trump campaign actively worked with a foreign government to bring down his opponent, Hillary Clinton, who maybe had she only found Wisconsin on a map, would have had a better shot in 2016. But you'll recall we were subjected to wall-to-wall coverage of these alleged crimes for 3 years, even after there was no evidence and an investigation and still no evidence. The Mueller report, of course, ultimately showed that libs didn't care. But evidence and truth were never the point. No, it was all an effort to undermine America's confidence in the duly elected commander-in-chief in the process that got him there. We don't have to go back into ancient history to find Democrats trying to undermine the validity of the process. Democrats were preparing to call this election fraudulent from the get-go. Remember that hysteria last summer over mailboxes? Democrats were pushing a wild-eyed conspiracy theory that Postal Service mailboxes and mail sorting machines were being removed en masse. Pictures like this were floating around Twitter, supposedly showing the USPS removing massive amounts of mailboxes in an effort to disenfranchise mail-in voters. And the conspiracy theory wasn't limited to wackos on Twitter. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez explicitly accused the Trump administration of trying to sabotage democracy.
The Postal Service is not only how we send a ballot, it is how we get our medicine, it is how we send rent checks, it's where people are getting their tax refunds. It is a core service of any civilized society. And an attack on our Postal Service and an attempt to dismantle our Postal Service out of a selfish desire to sabotage our democracy and maintain a grip on power is an attack on all of us.
It's a nice speech, but no one sabotaged the post office. And no one was trying to sabotage the post office. In September, the Democrat-controlled House Oversight Committee launched an investigation of Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. It was supposedly an investigation of campaign finance issues, but it was really just a witch hunt to placate conspiracy theorists in the Democrat base. Ultimately, the disappearing mailboxes were either being removed for refurbishment or because they just weren't being used, decisions that were made prior to DeJoy even taking on the role of Postmaster General. So it would have had to be quite a conspiracy, right? After the mailbox fiasco came claims of voter suppression. Every long line of voters was now evidence of something nefarious. Here's what AOC said just a few weeks ago about the long lines that she was witnessing herself.
Listen, there is no place in the United States of America where 2, 3, 4-hour waits to vote is acceptable. And just because it's happening in a blue state doesn't mean that it's not voter suppression.
Yeah, she didn't really explain that thought process, but anyway, explaining AOC's thoughts, that would be a show unto itself. She wasn't the only Democrat to say that stuff, though. Congressman Emanuel Cleaver tweeted out a video of voters standing in the rain, writing, "This is what voter suppression looks like. It's a shameful attempt to deter Americans from exercising their fundamental right to have a say in our democracy." Of course, it couldn't be that there was just a record turnout and that it's difficult to accommodate millions of voters rushing to the first days of early voting. No, it had to be some nefarious plot by Trump and his allies to turn voters away. Like everything else they claimed about this, it was utter nonsense. Despite a total lack of evidence, the media has been cheerleading these conspiracy theories for 4 years, all in order to delegitimize the process. Now they want you to shut up and accept the result that you've been given. So what changed? Well, it looks like Joe Biden might have won the election. So now the process is sacrosanct. Can't even be questioned. Can't even be validated. The difference between our questions and theirs is that theirs are actually concerns about the security, or there actually are concerns about the security of mass mail-in balloting, unlike the nonsense they were talking about over the summer. It is 100% true that mail-in balloting opens the door to fraud. That's why developed countries have banned it. As a matter of fact, 63% of countries in the European Union do not allow mail-in ballots except for citizens living overseas. France, for example, mais oui bien sûr, banned mail-in voting in 1975 because of massive fraud in Corsica, an island off of France best known for being the birthplace of Napoleon. Well, postal ballots there were stolen or bought, and voters often cast multiple votes. That's what we call fraud. So the French were like, enough of this. Mail-in ballots were also used to cast votes for dead people over there. So what other developed nations have already figured out, in the U.S., we apparently haven't figured out yet. We know that mail-in voting opens a door to fraud. A bipartisan organization founded by Jimmy Carter and James Baker, the Commission on Federal Election Reform, you'd think they'd know something about this, I would guess. They told us so. In 2005, the group released a report that concluded, quote, absentee ballots remain the largest source of potential voter fraud. You wouldn't know any of this by listening to much of the corporate media today. They say that President Trump's warnings about the potential for increased voter fraud were baseless and without evidence. But their claims defy logic. Without the need to show up in person or present any form of identification, it's all but impossible to confirm that a vote delivered through the mail actually belongs to the person who supposedly sent it in. Additionally, there's already evidence of voter irregularities in key states. In one Michigan county, a software glitch counted at least 6,000 votes cast for President Trump as votes for Joe Biden. Notice how the glitches all tend to go in one direction.
In Antrim County, ballots were counted for Democrats that were meant for Republicans, causing a 6,000 vote swing against our candidates. The county clerk came forward and said tabulating software glitched and caused a miscalculation of the votes. Since then, we have now discovered that 47 counties use this same software in the same capacity.
In another critical swing state, Nevada, a whistleblower with the Clark County Elections Department signed a sworn affidavit claiming that poll workers fabricated proof of residence for illegal voters. None of this is even disputed. These are matters of established fact already. As I said last week, it's not whether or not there was voter fraud. There most certainly was. The only question is the scale at which it occurred. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat the situation we find ourselves in. At this point, odds are against us. Odds are against the courts overturning the current vote tallies and delivering an electoral victory from the jaws of defeat to President Trump. But I want you to ask yourself this question. If the circumstances were reversed, do you think Joe Biden would be rushing to the phone to concede the election to Donald Trump? Come on. We can't know for sure, but we can take a guess based on what one of his colleagues said about the matter.
Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances because I think this is going to drag out, and eventually I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch and if we are as focused and relentless as the other side is.
How did that charming, warm, and deeply elegant woman not become president of the United States? You have to ask yourself, how could that have ever happened? Look, I can't tell you when or even if Donald Trump is going to formally concede the election, but if I were him, I wouldn't be in any rush, okay? Let the process play out, folks. That's what we all deserve. And that's where we currently find ourselves. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk to someone who's in the midst of his own battle to guarantee a fair election. My friend, Republican candidate for Congress in Pennsylvania and former Army Ranger Sean Parnell, joins us next.